We are going to be starting on more detail with the background and adding some more characteristics to the portrait, and also utilizing the grid as we are continuously trying to accomplish some depth. And also, as you can see, the perspective point, which would be 1 point perspective, is the other thing that we are going to try to, figure out and accomplish an environment, a narrative, and hopefully some interesting color when we get to that point. So let's begin. Now, before we start, I want us to take a quick look at what we have here as a landscape format. So we are placing two sheets of paper side to side, 18 by 24. So it's creating a ratio that is a wide landscape ratio. And what I'm thinking about doing, and what you might try to do, is to create 4 points. So we have a point here, we have a point here, we have a point here, and a point here. That I'm going to concentrate on using the grid, using the similar spiral breaking down of the squares into smaller segments to create these 4 points of my wide landscape format that I'm using here, my horizontal line or my horizontal format. So I'm going to be approaching this drawing with considering these 4 areas as metaphor areas, maybe areas of symbolism, or just more detail in these 4 points. And as you can see, I have my 1 point perspective, I have my portrait person right on the gaze of the eyes here. Then of course I have a very metaphorical area of the portrait, which is the torso, chest, could be metaphor of the heart or the soul. And then here we have an area that we can place possibly an object, maybe a symbol or a metaphor that can then create a relationship between, again, the other 3 points. So, see, I've already developed some sort of idea by looking at my portrait or my drawing here, my sketch, my initial idea, closely, and really considering what are some possibilities. So if you are stuck with your landscape and do not have any ideas, or ideas don't seem to be flowing, utilize this technique of the 4 points of your wide horizontal landscape composition. And then again, remember that you're going to be using these 4 points with the spiral technique, or the breaking down of the grid technique that we have used in developing the face. So, after looking at the diagrams of the 4 points that you might want to focus on for symbolism and representation, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just kind of gesture or do a shape in those 4 points. Now I already have my portrait here at that first point, so I'm just going to go ahead and just do a shape here, a shape down over here on this direction, and a shape over here at that far horizon line focal point where we have that 1 point perspective. So again, I'm just working intuitively. I'm not really planning a specific shape, but I thought about maybe kind of an interesting diamond form. So I got this center point here. I got this square right here that I'm going to do something with. I already marked out the half point of that center. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a gesture curve form, very similar kind of shape that we did while we were working with the head over here. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing over here. Is going to try to take another shape curved form from that corner there. Again, you know, you might do something completely different. Again, you're just trying to find some sort of beginning point, which is just, for me, just this kind of interesting kind of a spear point shape that I thought about. And I'm going to go ahead and connect this line here. And again, just see where it takes you. Just have fun with that symmetry. Now you can do this more loosely, you can do this gesturally, you can do this in any technique or any style that you want. Again, I'm just showing you how I approach a landscape format drawing. So I'm going to come over here to this point because I like to work diagonal. As you can see, I have my perspective path or my road or my trail that I've kind of am using as my 1 point perspective, and that is kind of angled towards this shape. And I kind of thought about that, which is why we're going to be using these 4-point areas of interest. Now over here again, I'm going to go ahead and make a halfway point mark there. Again, you see how I just kind of eyeballed it. It's okay at some point. Again, you can be as perfect as you want, but it's okay if you can just begin to, you know, use some more freehand drawing techniques. Okay, so see how I have that same triangular curved form. From the bottom, I'll go inside there with my eraser and clean things off. And I'm just going to stick with that because I want to keep this horizon line, but you can see how I'm kind of working, you know, I'm thinking about the relationship between the points, the 4 points. Okay, now in this direction over here, remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. When I say an area, these 4 areas of interest, this can be moved. You know, it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical at those points. So remember, though, that's just an area reference. I could have moved that over here, I could have moved that here, whatever. But again, you are just utilizing this area in these 4 areas and paying attention to those 4 areas as areas of interest. So I want to make a mark down here. Okay, so I do have, again, here is my row. I'm gonna keep it symmetrical. I'm gonna keep it even. Okay, again, you don't have to do that, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same kind of shape here. Now this all can change. Again, it's just a way to begin to let the ideas start to flow. When you have some work on there, your brain is forced to make some decisions. But I'm going to do something similar as I did over here. I'm going to take this here, there. Again, I'm going to clean all that up later. There we go. And you can see how I already have these areas that have some information that fills in that space, allowing me to make some decisions. So sometimes when you don't have any ideas, throw a shape down, repeat that shape in the areas that you want, that you need to fill, and then let's see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and already start to begin to design something different on this side. I'm thinking of maybe a interesting kind of structure possibly behind this figure. Don't know what that structure is as of right now, but I'm just going to go ahead and start to create some designs that might help me out. Again, remember, your idea does not have to be, doesn't have to make sense in a real world. This can be your world that you are creating. So let's go ahead and begin to allow those ideas to flow. And I'm going to go ahead and do a similar design. I'm going to mark a center point there, like these diamond forms that can start to grow vertically, maybe like an interesting plant form behind him, an interesting cactus form. I'm going to do one more. I have my halfway point, I guess right about here. Again, remember, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to make complete sense. It can be just any creation or line or shape that pops in your imagination. Okay, now I got this point here. I'm at the halfway point of my midpoint of my frame here. So I'm going to go ahead and call that the top of my interesting plant shape, or my interesting structure. And I kind of like that. Okay, now don't forget to go back in and do some erasing and cleaning as you go along. And remember, at some point I would like you to let it flow and for you to get aggressive with your marks. And don't follow the grid. At some point the grid doesn't need to be there for the textures or the leaves or whatever you want to put on the plant or whatever that is. You know, the grid is really to, remember, help you design the overall composition of your drawing. So, so this is a quick frontal view of the 3 shapes that I've added onto my areas of interest. And as you can see, I'm just trying my best to come up with some shapes that I could then work with and start to add some more detail and textures and hopefully some color. So I'm going to continue on and see how it goes. So I'm going to continue on. I wanted to show you what I'm using. I'm using my 4B drawing pencil, which is a pretty soft pencil for this initial sketch that I'm going to be doing here. And I also have my white eraser and my gum eraser. So that's what I have in my hand while I'm working. So I'm just going to go ahead and begin to add some interesting shapes to this form. I've already decided that I'm creating almost like a cactus plant form. And that's kind of what I'm imagining, this desert landscape with an interesting kind of maybe a plateau, something that you would see on the Navajo land, maybe in the Four Corners area, maybe eastern New Mexico. And so I'm thinking about an interesting plant. Now, again, I could always reference a plant. I could always probably, find an image and do some interesting actual plants that exist. But I'm just going to make up my own cactus, my own plant for right now, and see how that goes. So, as you can see, I've decided not to use a grid or use the same symmetry. I'm just making some interesting extensions off of the existing shape. So let's see how that goes. I'm still kind of using an asymmetric decision here. You know, it's not completely symmetric, it's asymmetric because some things are different on each side, but still maintaining, hopefully, a sense of balance. I'm also paying attention to my path or my road or my shape that's creating that perspective. I'm going to go ahead and move into this area, which would be the shoulders and the spear form that I have begun at the bottom. So here is a quick frontal image of the two shapes that I have on the two bottom areas. Next is going to be the top area where the focal point is. So I've created a small grid around that triangular shelter form. So here is a design for the area farthest back on that 1 point perspective. And you can see that I came up with something more representational of a teepee form and this radiating source of energy, or possibly um, a spiritual focal point, or even maybe something even more simple like the sun or the moon rising in that horizon line right above that teepee. So I really enjoy how that came out so far. And now I have my 4 areas. planned out with some shapes and some information that allows me to now continue with maybe some texture and some detail on possibly, I think I'm going to do the cactus next, add some interesting gestural, more organic movement. And then I'm going to plan on some shoulders, and I'm deciding now on how I'm going to deal with this area here when the two sheets of paper meet. I want to do something interesting there and something symbolic, but the shoulders will be here, and then of course I can start to add more detail and just really push this interesting spear form right in the center of that torso, as you know, push it as far as possible in a sense of design and detail, and then also come back into the face. So, but more importantly, you can see how that 4-point a symmetrical process really allows you to create, those areas that tie in and create a unity of information for the viewer to deal with, and for you to have a plan while you're designing or thinking about the composition on a format like this, the wide horizontal landscape format. It's called a lot of different things. But more importantly, it's a good way to utilize a frame such as this, whether you're doing a drawing or even whether you're doing photography or video or any type of cinematic compositions. This works really well to kind of utilize the efficiency of the space and use a space, because there's a lot of space within this type of format, and it really provides you a good framework to at least begin. And again, it can all change. Things can be edited out. So here is my drawing at this stage with the diagram of the 4 points overlapping. So it's helped me develop a solid structure for the composition. So I want you to try to create your 4 points of interest and try to develop a narrative, or remember, a connection of all 4. How do they relate to each other through either the narrative or the metaphor that you're trying to express, or really just formally, maybe just shapes and the style of that drawing or those areas are similar or have something similar that makes them relate to each other. So the final step in building the composition is to consider the space between the 4 points. So we have the third area in the center, as you can see with the blue circle and the 2 vertical lines. That is the next part, or the next area, that I'm going to consider adding another image. Now that image, since it's directly in the center of the composition, is going to play a pretty important role. So I have to be pretty careful with what I add in that part of the composition, because I want it to flow with the other metaphors that I have in the 4 points, and I don't want it to compete with the perspective, because I still want the portrait or the figure to be in the foreground, to be the thing or the image closest to you, and I want the cactus to play a similar role, almost like a twin figure of some sort. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Even though they're different metaphors or different images, they're kind of playing the same role. They're kind of confronting the viewer. But that center point, or that center position of the composition, so in my imagination, that center point appears to be an area that the cactus and the figure are trying to protect, or creating some sort of a level between the viewer and that center point. So I'm just going to consider things like that when I decide the image that I'm going to put in that position. And I want you to do the same thing too. After you've created your 4 points of interest, your 4 symbols, your 4 shapes, or your 4 metaphors, go ahead and decide on that center position in consideration with the two positions in the foreground and of course the metaphor in the background. And that is something that I'll be doing in part 3 of this demonstration. I will be adding that center metaphor or that center drawing, and then I will be deciding on some color, some shadow, and just some more detail that doesn't really involve the structure of the composition, but just more the aspects of defining the imagery. I hope that you have enjoyed this demonstration and have learned a new way on how to compose a drawing that has a format of a landscape or a ratio of a wide format. And I hope that it helps you develop a narrative and helps you practice how to compose imagery in order to create an environment that contains the compositional structure that is solid and that can really allow the viewer to interact and, more importantly, allow the artist to efficiently use the space and to efficiently use the grid to the artist's potential, which allows them to create the imagery and to create the metaphors and to create the interaction that the artist is seeking from the viewer. So I thank you for your time and your attention, and I do hope that you are at peace with making art, and I hope that this demonstration helps you use these techniques to create your own personal vision and your own expression as an artist.